So warmly welcome to this seminar organized by the Solidarity Committee for Afghanistan, where we will reflect upon the famous Meryl Streep quote, where she said that a bird has more freedom than women in Afghanistan, also birds, squirrels, cats, and other animals. So today, on the 15th of August, it marks the 4 years since the Taliban returned to power in Afghanistan, and we will discuss the realities of women and girls and men and boys in Afghanistan, and hopefully quite far beyond the headlines and simplified quotes on squirrels, birds, and cats. I recently had the opportunity to visit Afghanistan together with a delegation from the Solidarity Committee for Afghanistan. And I think that what was striking immediately when we arrived in Kabul, in the streets of Kabul, is to see the presence of women and girls, boys and men in the streets. So even though we might have known that before, it is already during the first minutes you can see the difference from the pictures that you're given, that women are no longer present in the public spaces. And during our 2 weeks in Afghanistan, we also had the opportunity to visit and meet with civil society organizations where both men and women work and are active, with UN colleagues, and also to visit clinics where we met with lots of female staff, midwives, doctors, and nurses, and so on. So I think that just by a simple and short visit, you get a completely different and more nuanced picture than the pictures that reaches us through mainstream media on Afghanistan. And of course, it's important to consider the nuances, but I think that we need to do that also when we think about what Afghanistan was before 2021, during the Republic times, that there were huge differences between the lives of women and girls, boys and men in rural and urban areas, people who had the chance to have formal education or formal employment, and the majority of the people living in the rural areas, mainly engaging in agriculture and informal work. But also it's equally important to acknowledge those nuances and varieties that we see in Afghanistan today. And of course, no country, Afghanistan included, can or should be described with just one picture, one impression, and one narrative. So trying to make the picture a bit more complicated and nuanced, we have an excellent panel with us today, 3 people that we have invited. So we have Annette Lyth, who is the former head of field office at UNAMA in Kabul, who used to be Kabul-based, but just returned to Sweden. We have Samira Sayed Rahman, who is the senior advocacy and policy advisor at Save the Children in Afghanistan. And we have Ali Latifi, who is a journalist at the New Humanitarian, also based in Kabul. And my name is Kajsa Johansson, and I am the Secretary General of the Solidarity Committee for Afghanistan. Before getting started with the questions to the panelists, we of course also would like to welcome and thank the audience that are with us today. There is a Q&A function where you can write if you would have any question or comment to the speakers. And there will be around 15 minutes set aside at the end of the seminar for these questions. So my colleagues here at SCA will be moderating the questions, but please put them in the Q&A box, and they will look at them and then make sure that they come into the conversation here in the seminar. And should there be lots of questions, we might not have the opportunity to attend to all of them, but of course this is a conversation that continues. So don't worry, we will continue the discussion also after the seminar. So I would like to start by inviting the panelists to reflect a bit on the title that we choose for this for the seminar. Does a bird have more freedom than women in Afghanistan? And maybe starting with you, Annette, on how do you interpret this quote, and would you agree? Is that a narrative or a picture that align with your experience from the past years in Afghanistan?
Thank you, Kajsa, and thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share my experiences, but also from the very many discussions I had with women inside Afghanistan and their impression. And as you said, I would like to emphasize that I was based in Kabul. I was out in the provinces around Kabul, but of course my experience is very much colored by being in the capital. But as you said, I came to Afghanistan in June 2023. And before I went, I got a lot of questions. Why are you going to Afghanistan? What are you going to do there? And I said, I want to see if I can do something for the women. Maybe I won't be able to do anything. Maybe I won't even be able to meet them, because that was the impression that I got to sitting outside. So, but maybe I won't be able to meet them, but I want to see. So I went there. Of course, when I left, one of my colleagues calculated that I had met more than 200 women. And I had visited tailoring centers run by women, factories run by women. I had had lunch at restaurants that were run by women. I had met the most incredible women, listened to the most remarkable stories of resilience, resistance, how they never gave up, even if the Taliban tried to stop them, they found other ways. Yeah, really remarkable stories, and stories of solidarity, finding ways of supporting each other. And so that is my experience. Because I was working with the UN, we were able to bring in groups of women also to provide them with safe space to come together, because it's not easy. I could never deny that it's very difficult, of course, the situation for women, for them to meet in particular. So sometimes we gave our conference room just for an NGO that needed to come together and go through their statute or changes or something. But we also created a few women's groups that met regularly. One of them were women from the provinces, the 6 provinces that I worked on. And we trained them in advocacy, on how to do advocacy. And then we encouraged them to go back to their provinces and advocate for women. We didn't say about what, just see if there's any space, if you could do something for other women. And it was quite remarkable how much space there still was for them to do things, to advocate. They managed to reopen some educational centers. They managed to prevent the closure of women-run shops, so forth. It was quite, as long as it didn't really collide with the decrees by the Emir, for example, around education or schools for girls, for example, there was quite a lot of space for them. And of course, in this advocacy, they created alliances with male allies, with family members, maliks, elders, and so forth. But they were able to then, with the support of these alliances, engage directly with the DFA or the Taliban. And I remember one story I thought was quite remarkable was where one of the local Taliban came from the same village as one of these women. And he said how proud he was that one of the women from his village was actually standing up for other women. And he said, that's so good that you find something for the women to do, because they're under a very difficult situation. I mean, it's not that everybody's happy with the situation. Also, a lot of men are unhappy with the situation. We also had another group with young women that that met regularly in our conference room. We called it our Young Women's Peer Support Network, because the first time we put them together. At the time, I think there were about 20 young women who had been forced to leave university, who were sitting at home being depressed and so forth. But the first time we met, I said, this is a safe space for you. You can do what you want with it. But we didn't have any big funding or anything. So we did an inventory of the skills and capacities that they already had. And with those skills and capacities, they took turns teaching each other in this group. And the group expanded. When I left, there was about 40 in this group. And after about a year, the women themselves said, this has given us so much to see that what we can do, that we have capacities, we have skills within ourselves. And it's given us so much, we would like to reach out to other women and give them the same opportunity. So they started doing external workshops in safe spaces around Kabul. And one of the first ones I remember was, the theme was the power of speech. So in your face, PVPV law, which says women can't talk. Yeah. That's what they did. Or they focused on finding your inner talent, your inner strength, and so forth. So to wrap up, I just want to then reflect on this. Is this useful, this narrative?
Mm.
Well, I mean, so many times the women inside Afghanistan told me how frustrated they were with this description. And as I explained, this is so far from my experience and their experience that they shared with me. But also, it's so dangerous when we look at the history of Afghanistan, where this narrative around women's victimhood and the helplessness has then has allowed different outside forces to come in and in the name of saving the women and so forth, and we've seen what that has led to. So it's not only an unhelpful narrative, I think it's a potentially very dangerous narrative as well. I mean, the women, they don't need us to rescue them, but they need our support, of course, in resisting and fighting back and trying to change their societies themselves, because it can only come from them themselves. Thank you.
No, thank you, Annette, and thank you for being quite concrete as well, like on the initiatives that you have worked with and then the women and the girls that you have met. So I turn to Samira with kind of the same question. So how do you feel? And I mean, you're also, of course, in a different situation. You are an Afghan woman, but also working professionally with these questions. So how do you interpret the quote, and does it correspond to your experience, both work-wise and yeah, as a professional?
Thank you for having me. Similarly to Annette, I also carry a set of privileges that allow me to do things that other women won't necessarily be able to do. I am Afghan Canadian. I am a dual national. I also spent, I've been living in Afghanistan now for a decade. I've been here since 2015. When I was outside of Afghanistan for the few months since August 15 until I returned in 2020, early 2022, I believed everything that I saw online. I believed absolutely everything I saw on social media, everything I saw in the media about the restrictions on women, about what the streets of Kabul would look like, what working in Kabul would look like. And all of that was thrown out the window the day I arrived back in Afghanistan. The reality on the ground was very different than what was portrayed in the media, in social media, in conversations that I was having with Afghans who were inside Afghanistan, some of them, and it was it was a very stark contrast, just that drive from the airport to the downtown part of the city where I was living at the time. And what was going on in the city was very different than what was going on in the conversations that are happening outside this country, in the conversations that are happening online. When I first heard this quote of "Are Afghan women freer than a bird?" I understood the intention, right? The intention is there to draw attention to the restrictions that Afghan women face. But again, while comparing Afghan women to a bird might sound evocative to Western audiences, it also risks reducing us to something, as Annette was saying, that is fragile, that is pitiable, that is something that needs saving. And Afghan women are not just surviving in Afghanistan. They are building businesses. They are running organizations. They're supporting and basically the backbone of the humanitarian response. They're keeping their communities alive under extraordinary pressures. And they're navigating a reality in which every single step, whether that is from leaving the home to earning an income, is regulated. And yet they are adapting in ways that are not reflected in these conversations that are happening online or in these conversations that are happening outside of Afghanistan. The dangers with this quote and with such language is that it dehumanizes Afghan women. And as Annette was rightfully saying, for decades, Afghan women's bodies and our lives have been used as political tools to justify war, to justify intervention, to symbolize liberation or symbolize oppression, depending on whose agenda it is that we're following. And whether that's from the Soviet invasion to the civil war in the Mujahideen era to the Taliban round one in the 90s, the Republic and the Western presence during the 2000s, and now again, right? Saving Afghan women has been this rallying cry for a certain agenda. But once that, once those headlines fade, once this Meryl Streep quote is no longer on the front pages of the newspapers, it's these same women that are left here without a seat at the table, without being represented in conversations that are taking place around the world, and without the resources and the space to shape not only the policies that affect them, but also to be able to survive and thrive and build meaningful lives. And even today, we're seeing that more than ever, where Afghan women's narratives are being used instrumentally, media, social media, the Afghan diaspora, pre and post 2021, are framing women living in this country as passive victims. They're either suffering or they're waiting to find asylum somewhere else, or they need to be saved. And in reality, as Annette said, women are managing businesses. They're producing food. They're caring for families. They're leading NGOs and civil society organizations. They're advocating for humanitarian access with the authorities. And all of this they are doing in one of the world's most severe crises. Just for scale, and these are numbers that many of you may already know, but 28 million Afghans, that's 2/3 of the population, are currently in need of humanitarian assistance. Over 80% live under the poverty line, majority of those being women and girls. In the first half of this year, we have seen nearly 2 million Afghans being returned from Iran and from Pakistan, often arriving with just the clothes on their backs into, an already strained country, strained by the conversation that we just had, but also by drought, by economic turmoil, by displacement. And within this context within which we are working, this metaphor for freedom or freedom of women and comparing them to birds, risks really obscuring the very real daily choices that Afghan women are making. That they are agents of survival, they are agents of leadership, they are agents of innovation and negotiating access for businesses to markets, running schools, organizing health programs, advocating for their families in one of the most difficult circumstances on the planet.
Yeah, thank you so much, Samira, for that very powerful speech and very inspiring as well. So turning to you, Ali, you have maybe similar, but also from a slightly different professional position, so to say, being a journalist. So how would you say, and you can also see this from a journalist perspective of the spread that this got and the impact that this had. So what would you say are the impacts of this kind of quotes or this specific quotes and the spread that it gets and like the dominance that it managed to get also in, especially I would say in Western media, of course, but what would you say?
Man, sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Well, so I don't want to repeat what Annette and Samira said. They gave very clear examples of the complications of the reality on the ground. And as you said, as a journalist, I will say it was a very TMZ quote trying to sound intellectual. Because what is a bird? A bird is something you put in a cage. A bird is something you possess. A bird is something that doesn't have agency in most of the world, including the United States. And it's quite ironic coming from someone who was such a frequent collaborator of Harvey Weinstein to make this quote. From someone who was surrounded by women who, as Samira brought up earlier, like the agency and the power and all of these women had all of those things during the occupation. And what have they done since then? How have they actually contributed to the lives of Afghan women other than constantly saying, this is not possible, this is not possible, and shutting the doors to any kind of engagement or assistance or development? So it was actually I mean, on the one hand, it was really shallow and base, and on the other, it did have its impact because here's this, m massively respected actress, this Oscar winner who, again, I would love to know if Fawzia Koofi and Habiba Sarawi could name five of her films, who made this quote to the United Nations without ever having been in the country, without, having been there during the occupation when Fawzia and Habiba were in positions of power and, had a lot of money at their disposal, and who has not been there today. Um, so yeah, it's what really upsets me about it is that it's another example of taking agency away from the Afghan people, but particularly from Afghan women, because as we've kept repeatedly saying, is that a woman's life, a woman's body is constantly politicized. Not, I mean, all over the world. In the United States, it's very similar, but obviously in the case of Afghanistan, whether that's the Islamic Emirate, the Taliban saying that we're here to help women, or whether that's the occupation saying we're here to free women. And in both cases, um, it either gives a lot of power and a lot of influence to a very small select group of people who then hog that power and influence, or it relies entirely on the men to sort of dictate that narrative. So it was harmful, eh, and it's sort of, this has been the problem in Afghanistan in terms of the media, as someone who works in the media, in terms of the media ever since, I mean, I've been reporting on Afghanistan since at least 2011. And, I had heard things like there was a documentary filmmaker who went on an internet show and said she had been to places of Afghanistan where people hadn't seen the wheel. So I mean, I guess she traveled to the Flintstones because that would mean, she didn't see a bike, she didn't see a cart, she didn't see anything. Like, where in Afghanistan does that exist? I remember there was some kind of an article about a father who had lost his child, and this writer, I think from Canada, had said, "Oh, I was so shocked that, here's this Afghan man, he grew up around all this war and all that, but he still cared about his child." Um, so there's always been a very harmful narrative and a very reductive narrative around Afghanistan. Is it a traditional society? Yes, of course. Is it a fairly conservative society? Yes, of course. But that doesn't inherently make it bad. That doesn't inherently make it problematic. And that's not all it is. Um, and even if it is, so what? Like, that's the way people want to live. Um, yeah, so I think it was just another example of sensationalizing everything.
Yes, thank you very much. It made me think when I lived in Afghanistan, that was no a very long time ago. I ran a blog, I mean, mainly directed to a Swedish audience. And in the beginning, before I felt like I knew enough to actually write something, I posted a lot of everyday pictures. And they got a lot of attention because just posting everyday pictures of Afghan men and women doing very ordinary things. And also, like your example here, men caring for children, men caring for their wives, for people in society, stirred a lot of questions. Like, I didn't know that existed. So somehow we thought, like Swedes thought that Afghans did not know how to care for each other. So I think it's like you bring up here, like the damage that it does to both, like how we view both women and men, everyone in society, with these very stereotype pictures.
Yeah, it means you're not human because, I
No,
mean,
yeah,
any
because these are very basic
person
human.
takes
Yeah,
care of their children. Any human person is afraid of death.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. And I mean, one reason why we also wanted to like unpack these, also show opportunities, because I mean, if you show everything in black and white, and especially like just showing that nothing is possible, no resistance is being done, it's quite difficult also to identify. Then what can we, as international organizations, the international community, what can we actually do? Because it seems like you hit a wall. So I would like to know, Annette, again, if you could say a bit like from your point of view, what can the international community do? And I think we heard really strongly in all three contributions that it's absolutely not about saving anyone. There is so much power, but what can we do to actually support like the initiatives and the strength that is already there? What could the international community's role be?
Yeah, well, to start off is that the situation in Afghanistan does not at all fit our traditional donor module, which is part of the problem. As I just explained, there is no lack of activities that women are doing, but they don't fit. They will not have a board that is run by a woman as the head, for example, and they don't fit this donor model. And I think that's one of the really biggest challenge now, because when I see also how the UN agencies like UN Women, for example, are acting, they're still using that same module. But that means that they're not really reaching the grassroots women. The women, all of these women are doing low profile activities that very few know about. And I'll give an example. So two young women in my young women's peer sport network told me that they had a secret school, and they asked me about it. And of course, they were very nervous because it was, it's dangerous. And I said, have you tried to link up with someone who has a license to run a madrasa? Because I think a bit over a year ago, there were a bunch of former women's high schools or girls' high schools that got a license to run a madrasa. And many of these madrasas are actually having a mixed curriculum. And some of them have other sub-licenses to schools like this. So it gives them a little protection. And she said, yes, we wanted to do that, but the donor NGO, the donor doesn't allow us to do that, because the donor doesn't want to be seen as supporting a madrasa. So then we put young women at risk instead. And so who is this helping? Likewise, when I was talking to UN Women, they have a huge project now. They got a lot of money because and they need to spend them. Then they say they're rebuilding the women's movement. But who are we to rebuild the women's movement? It means again that you're creating a lot of artificial organizations. Some of them we know already are infiltrated by the DFA, the Taliban, because that's a way to get money. And every organization that gets registered now needs a male flag front or a male face to it. But of course, it's a huge difference. There are the old NGOs from before, the all-women NGOs. They also have a man running the board, for example, but these are male allies. These are all organizations that they are run, and they have male allies. I was also out when I've been out in Kabul, visiting women's centers. I visited some of them, very strong, but they did vocational skills trainings, first aid, everything. They had these joint events where they were reciting poems about resilience, power, things like that. They didn't speak English, so they had never had contact with the INGOs or the UN and the donors. And they were forced to close these centers because they didn't have money. So it's such a mismatch. And how can we support? Well, by being more innovative, more flexible, more understanding the situation in Afghanistan, and we have to learn how to, and from the donor side, how to navigate the situation. The women already know how to navigate it, but so we have to learn now how to navigate it with them and make sure that they are able to access this support. Thank you.
And I mean, out of curiosity, like based on your experience, having worked also in the UN system, and I mean, also having had access to donors, do you think that that there is a possibility to discuss this? Because donor systems are usually very rigid and not that very flexible. So do you see the opportunity to actually get this through in practice?
I think there has to be.
Yeah.
And now it's very timely, because we all have to review how the humanitarian aid, how the development aid is being provided.
Yeah.
So it's actually, I think Afghanistan in general is a really, really good case study for also the damage that the wrong kind of development, in particular how to provide it in the wrong way, the effects that has on a society. And so now there is a chance to learn from that, but also to learn how do we make sure that in the future development aid is provided in a way so that it supports traditional societies and strengthen the positive sides of it, rather than than sometimes even damaging it. And also how are we able to navigate a society like this, or a context like this, where we have to be a bit more so that we have to do outreach to NGOs, and not just this traditional sitting in the office and then we do a call for a proposal, some kind of business model where the strongest and the strongest NGOs and the English speakers and the ones who know what to say are the ones that win the proposal. I mean, this whole model, I think, has to be reviewed anyway. Yeah. So why not you start with Afghanistan?
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I think that several of us have been battling with this model also in other countries where development agencies are operating. So yeah, very, very true. And turning to Samira, also like focusing on what to do and how could organizations like, of course, like the Solidarity, but the international community, including international organizations, support women and girls in like to get a better future in the initiatives that they have. And I know, and you spoke a little bit about it in your first intervention about the women-led businesses, because it also is about like being a bit careful. I think Annette also touched upon that. It's not necessarily, I mean, you need to have the appropriate ways of working, ways of approaching, because there's always a risk that you damage something that is not fragile in the sense, but that a support comes in that actually does more harm than good.
Yeah. Well, just building off of what Annette was saying in terms of the models need to be changed, but we also, in the current context, there needs to be a change in the ways in which donors view certain things, right? Like the ways they see development funding. One of the challenges we've been facing in the last 4 years is that any sort of sustainable longer term programming is not being supported by the donor community. A barrier wall in a village to protect it from flash flooding in a country that is in the midst of, that faces some of the harshest impacts of global climate change, that is considered to be the kind of development assistance that leads to government assets. That is not a community asset. That is not, it does not belong and protect the community from the impacts of climate change, but that is seen as a different type of a development. And it's this model that has made it incredibly challenging for us to work, to provide longer term sustainable solutions to some of the major issues that are facing Afghans in general, but in particular, Afghan women and girls. And you can't talk about the future of girls without the future of all Afghans. And I said it in my initial comments as well, because all of this is interconnected. Afghanistan is facing one of the world's largest humanitarian crises, and the funding that is coming in right now is just not enough. It is not at scale. The economy has contracted. You have over 15 million people who are acutely food insecure. You have nearly 4 million children who are suffering from acute malnutrition. And what happens when a family doesn't have the money or doesn't have access to food? It's women and girls who are eating last. And that is a reality, not just in Afghanistan, but in much of the world. When you have forced returns, as we've seen from neighboring countries, you add more pressure on the communities that are already existing inside Afghanistan, right? On top of the existing issues that we have of climate change, floods, droughts, making longer term stability harder to achieve. And then in this environment, it is young girls in particular who are amongst the most vulnerable, not just because of restrictions per se, but because of the compounded pressures that they face being women in this and girls in this society. And when you don't have access to safe spaces, when your community is strained economically, financially, when your family is forced into making impossible choices between food and between food and anything else, it's the girls who are going to be suffering. It's the girls who are going to be having a harder time just to survive. So if we want to protect the future of Afghan girls, we must address both their immediate humanitarian needs and the structural barriers at the same time. This means sustained multi-year investments in Afghan programming. It's not just short-term aid. Well, one-stop food distribution is not going to help an Afghan girl have a thriving future. It's moving beyond, when the headlines fade and the Meryl Streep quote is no longer relevant. It means scaling up the kinds of programming that Annette was talking about. It's about scaling up community-based models, whether that's in education, whether that's in livelihoods, whether that's in healthcare. It means linking education to other pathways, particularly agriculture. This is a very agrarian society. Many of the investments in Afghanistan over the course of the last 25 years have focused on urban centers, have focused on women and girls and their needs in the urban centers. It's about ensuring access to clean water, access to healthcare, to climate resilient agriculture, because girls can only thrive if their families are safe, if their communities are well fed, if there is a future that is worth staying for in Afghanistan. And you mentioned the Afghan private sector. The Afghan private sector is the backbone of this country. It's the backbone of this economy, and it employs over 80% of the Afghan workforce in the absence or the decrease of the public sector in the last several years. It's become a lifeline for Afghan women. Women entrepreneurs are running shops, they're running restaurants, they're running businesses. We often focus on the very small interventions of handicraft and, sewing and tailoring classes for women. But there are women in this country who are running large and medium enterprises that are employing hundreds, if not thousands, of women and men, being able to provide for their families and reinvesting that money into the Afghan economy. And Afghan women who run these businesses are, they're exporting products around the world, like saffron, like dried fruits. They are in the packaging industry, and they're doing all of this under extreme restrictions. And I don't mean extreme restrictions from the authorities. I mean extreme restrictions when it comes to accessing finance, when it comes to banking restrictions, when it comes to being able to pay for imports or to be able to send their goods abroad. These barriers are impacting most women-led businesses. There was a study recently done, I'm slipping my mind who did it, but over 70% of women-owned businesses reported a lack of access to finance as their number one challenge. That is compounded by restrictions on mobility in the sense that they cannot access visas and travel to neighboring countries for their business purposes. And then it is the societal and the restrictions within the country itself. Women are less likely to own collateral. They are less likely to own property, which therefore makes them ineligible for most loans, even pre-2021, but especially post-2021, making it far more difficult for them to access financing from the banks. Women are in rural communities are, face further challenges. They have poor internet, they have damaged infrastructure, damaged roads, they don't have the access to electricity that is needed to expand their businesses, and they are further distanced from markets. So unless we are willing to invest, and the international community is willing to invest in these types of initiatives, but also in lifting some of these barriers that are preventing the Afghan private sector from employing more people, it's going to continue to be a very challenging situation for Afghan women and Afghan business owners in particular.
Yes, thank you very much. A very clear example again. And I think that also, it links to the whole discussion on the sanctions and how that is also affecting negatively the conditions for all development, but for more specifically also for private sector development in Afghanistan. So before letting in some of the questions that we received from the audience, I would just like to hear from you, Ali, because now we talked about the civil society with in different forms. We talked about the private sector and so on, but also looking a bit at your field of work and the conditions for journalists to operate in Afghanistan, but also to spread the message, to spread like different stories and so on. But of course also this, are there conditions for journalists to operate freely, or what are your working conditions?
Well, I'm still working, so there's
Yes.
that. Tolo TV is still operating, Oriana TV is still operating,
Mm,
national television and radio is still operating. Of course, they've had to change the way they operate. The
mm,
public channels, for instance, had to take off a lot of their entertainment programs, but a certain amount, a surprising amount, are still on. Women who appear on television have to cover their face with a COVID mask. Um, there are, if you're going to have a political discussion, it has to be pre-taped and it has to be approved. So there are efforts to limit what gets out.
mm,
But despite that, they're still operating and they're still reporting on things. I mean, there's been retirees have been protesting for, I don't know, I think like 2 years now because they haven't been getting their pension funds. And that keeps getting covered in the local media.
mm,
And that's an outright criticism of the Islamic Emirate, of the current government, because before that, the issue with pension funds was that it wouldn't come on time or things like that due to budget issues, or issues with the former government. Um, um, and they've had, for instance, there have been panels on the rights of women in Islam,
mm,
on they have talk shows where a governor or a minister will sit with residents from a certain province and basically, talk to them. They will explain what's going on in their province, and there'll be an audience asking questions. And almost every public sort of interview an official has given, where there is an audience, there will undoubtedly be, in an all-male audience, there will be a question about women and girls in schools. Um, so there is possibility. And that's why, again, going back to this whole thing of framing and the media, for instance, like this whole term of quote unquote secret schools, it's not
mm,
helping the situation because it's not true. These schools are not secret.
mm,
They're just unofficial. They're in people's homes. They're in like private businesses. They're in shopping malls. They're in you know corners of the city. They're not hidden by any means.
mm.
No Talib is stupid enough to like not think that why are these 17-year-old girls all walking in a line with notebooks in their hands,
Yeah.
waiting outside the door of this house. Um, that also impacts the ability of people to assist because, for instance, instead of calling it an unofficial school, instead of calling it a home school, when you call it a secret school, even though you invite the BBC to come and record it, when you call it a secret school, you make it sound more dangerous. You make it sound more difficult so that the person sitting in Canada or the United States or Sweden is less likely to want to get involved in that.
Mm,
Um, and there's also the issue of, again, Afghan journalists inside Afghanistan, Afghan journalists specifically, are operating under extreme conditions, but still managing to do their job. And yet you have journalists outside, creating false reports.
mm,
Something as easily refutable as saying that contraceptives have been banned in the country. It
mm.
was a major international newspaper that
Yes.
put out the headline, put out the story. I live in front of like three pharmacies. I went to them, saw nothing was missing. I asked them, they said, nope. I know gynecologists. I asked them, they said, nope. I asked the Ministry of Public Health, they said, nope. We asked the Ministry of Vice and Virtue. Within an hour, we had disproven that theory, that story. But as long as that story was out, and because it was a bigger outlet, then I ended up writing it for the National in the UAE with my friend. Our story didn't get the same attention.
No.
We had CNN with that infamous, this girl as if she's in like a child beauty pageant, getting ready and putting on makeup because she's allegedly going to get married to this older man.
Mm,
And she walks out of the house with, an older man holding her hand, as if the entire neighborhood in Kabul or any other city wouldn't ask, why is this old man that we've never seen holding this little girl's hand that we've seen every single day on the streets. So I think it's very important that if you are going to report on Afghanistan, instead of placing more pressure on journalists within the country, especially those that don't have second passports and such, you owe it to them to be accurate, to be fair, to be honest, because the more that you print that is untrue or misinformed, or to be kind, misinformed, the more suspicion it creates of every journalist inside the country. So, a couple of years ago, I was on a panel with this journalism panel, and there was the head of one of these so-called like diaspora media, and they had said that, oh, I don't ask the Taliban, I don't ask the Islamic Emirate for quotes or because I know they're gonna lie to me. And that's really irresponsible as a journalist. It's unethical because you got to try. They may not respond to you. I mean, the Republic, during the occupation barely responded to me. These guys respond sometimes they don't. And the best you can do is just say they didn't respond to me.
Yeah.
And if you're worried that they're going to lie to you, I mean, the Biden administration was lying about Gaza for how many years? The Trump administration lies about all kinds of things. That's what governments do. They lie. They protect themselves. The Republic lied, said we have the whole country under control. Nothing is happening. We'll be fine. What happened? So the most important thing, because there's so much pressure on journalists inside the country, is that for the ones outside to actually be responsible and behave ethically.
Yeah. No, I think again, I mean, similar to the discussion on civil society, for example, the power dynamics between actors based outside the country and inside the country is a really crucial issue to be addressed here. I will move. We have quite a lot of questions from the audience, so I will kindly ask you to be quite quick in your response so that we can have a couple of them, have time for at least a couple of them before we have to wrap up. So the first one, I think it's more to Annette because it regards stories about employees at UNAMA receiving death threats and threats against their families, like female colleagues. And that they would therefore stay at home and not go to the office. And what is UNAMA doing about this? And yeah, what do you know about like where these threats come from? So Annette.
So about, I think it was just before I arrived, so 2.5 years ago, there was a decree first to ban women from working for NGOs, and then that was expanded for women also to work for the UN. At the time, for a while, the UN kept all staff at home, and then slowly they were bringing back both the men and women. And then there was not an issue, at least, I mean, it's different in different parts of the country, of course, but where I work in Kabul, it was not an issue for a long time, for 2 years. And then there was one event where several of our female Afghan women were followed home. And then when they arrived home, these two masked men were standing there asking to talk to their husbands and explaining that if they go back to work, they will get killed. We still don't have an official response to who was behind this. But the government has ensured UNAMA that it is safe for the women to come back if they just comply with the hijab requirement and madrasas. So women have started to come back to work. It's very, very difficult to know how to respond to this appropriately, because if you tell the female staff to sit at home, then basically you do what they want, and you take them these workspaces away from women and so forth. So I think the UN is just trying to navigate this as best as they can, but there is no official confirmation of who is behind. And so far it was this events for 2 days, and there's nothing, has not been anything after that.
Thank you. So we have a second question, which regards the concept of gender apartheid that we know is being used by some groups, some advocates to advocate on behalf of Afghan women and girls. So the question here is, from the perspective of women living inside Afghanistan, how relevant and useful do you think that this concept is, and does it resonate with your lived experience? So maybe I will ask Samira to start there, if you could reflect upon that one.
Thanks. I think it goes back to the whole topic of this conversation.
Yeah.
And the very popular terminology and the words that we are using outside of this country have a direct impact on the lived experiences of the people inside the country. And in a limiting way in many ways. These conversations that are taking place in the diaspora or in political capitals around the world are very different than the conversations that are taking place amongst Afghan women inside Afghanistan. And for the women here right now, it's about, okay, how am I going to make ends meet? It's about how am I going to be able to put food on the table? It's about how am I going to ensure, as I was saying, with the private sector, that I can make this export that I need to make to be able to pay my 200 employees. These are the conversations that are taking place amongst Afghan women inside Afghanistan right now.
And Annette, would you like to add something to that?
Yes. One thing that to keep in mind is that the women that I talked to inside of Afghanistan, for example, commented on the fact that every time there is one of these sensational campaigns or something like that going on outside, the oppression of women inside is actually increased. So it's kind of, so why are we doing this? Is it for us or for them, actually? And I think the whole concept of gender apartheid is the same. I don't deny that I think that could somehow explain some of the situation, but is it useful? Would it change anything for women inside Afghanistan? I don't see that. I do think that I thought it was quite interesting in the last report of the Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women. She was looking if could you apply for the Genocide Convention, for example. And if anything, I think perhaps that in that case could provide an entry point, because people are concerned over the fact that there's so little medical health for mothers, expecting mothers. Everybody's very concerned that there will eventually run out of female doctors to look at women and so forth. And everybody knows this has an effect on children. And we already see maternity mortality, for example, have increased. That would be a concept that would be understandable for people, at least. But the whole gender apartheid, that would be a legal exercise that would have very little impact on people's actual life, in my opinion.
Yep. Ali, would you like to add something on the gender apartheid concept discussion?
I'm kind of more fascinated by this idea of trying to apply genocide to Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Because we're in a state where most of the world denies an actual genocide going on that's being broadcast live on our phones every single day, and then appropriating this line in a situation where 20,000 women were killed in what, like 2.5 years? I think it's insane. The gender apartheid thing, it's another thing where you're taking something, again, apartheid, Israel is the ultimate apartheid state. So if you don't have an issue with apartheid, call that one out. But yeah, you're taking this Western concept and trying to apply it to Afghanistan. Do the people you're quote unquote working for understand this concept? Does it resonate with them? Does it apply to them? This is the thing. Again, as I said, Afghanistan is a traditional society. There always has been certain rules, whether we like it or not, whether we agree with it or not. There have always been certain rules in society for men and for women. Have the Taliban taken it to a whole nother level? Sure. Do they justify certain things by for instance, the mahram regulation, if we're being honest about it, does come from, Islamic law, and they will defend it that way. And so I think it's very difficult to take these terms and to just apply them wholesale to a situation and an environment you don't understand, especially when you have a government that is so much obsessed with this whole concept of identity politics and being like, we will not let the rest of the world dictate to us. We will only go by Sharia law, by Sharia, because Sharia means law. We will only go by instead of engaging with them in that way and saying, okay, you say that, according to Sharia, this is what needs to happen. But what about, these interpretations? What about these countries? What about this? What about that? Rather than saying, oh, we invented this new term and we're gonna label you with it. Just gives them more fodder.
Sally, I would like to keep you for one last and quick question, because what we got one person in the audience who asked about music and songs and traditional dance. Is it banned and completely absent, or do we still hear music and songs and see dance in Afghanistan?
Sit in any car in any part of the country and there is music on the radio. People are listening to it. At the very most, they will turn off the radio when there's a checkpoint. Sometimes they may lower it, sometimes they don't turn it off at all. Go to any wedding, and Samira will know this better than I do. The irony is the men's section is completely quiet. There's no music, there's no dancing in the men's section, but in the women's section, there's a DJ, there's dancing, there's singing, there's people dressed in the most, women dressed in the most insane, sort of like showy ways. The bride's family will change like 5 times in one night. So again, this is another example of agency. People have found ways to do what they love and not draw too much attention to themselves. So yes, there's still music and dancing in homes and in private settings. Yes.
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you for the nice illustration also with the weddings. And I can also confirm that in the cars where we were in Afghanistan 2 weeks ago, there were quite a lot of music being played as well. So we are about to close this seminar. There are some questions that are not answered yet. They're in the Q&A box. We are not sure if the panelists can actually access the Q&A box after the seminar or even during the seminar, but we're happy to facilitate contacts and maintaining dialogue. So those of you who would like to still continue the discussion, you have the contact details of us, and we're happy to facilitate. I would just like to thank you, the 3 panelists, so much. And I think that it's very clear. I think that one of you said, like, we need to rethink the whole development cooperation to Afghanistan. And I think that we had very good examples of several of the sectors that could be used as examples of this. I mean, these examples of where investment in climate resilience is seen as something supporting the government, a system supporting civil society, which is not at all adapted to the realities of Afghanistan, and a really like unflexible international system that does not manage to address the ways that we could support women and girls in Afghanistan. And also very, very strong messages on the power relationship, I would say, within the media, and how difficult it is to get through, not just in like professional media, but in social media and in any media, with narratives contradicting the main Western view on how things are in Afghanistan. So we will pick maybe some of these ideas up and for continued discussion, continue maybe joint writing and so on. So we will stay in touch and hope that you will too, and that the discussion will continue also in your respective organizations. So thank you very much from the Solidarity Committee for Afghanistan.